Okay, good morning everyone. Can I remind you all that this meeting is being broadcast live over the internet, so we are all on camera. Please be aware you may be visible on screen when people around you are speaking. Please remember to speak clearly into your microphones. This meeting is available to view online now and in the future, whenever and wherever people want to watch it. We welcome the use of the Welsh language at meetings. I have had no requests to speak Welsh today, so this meeting will be conducted in English only. I would like to welcome everyone attending the meeting today and anyone watching the meeting via the webcast. Please can all mobile phones and other noisy devices be put on silent. If there is an emergency alarm, follow the green signs and go to the ground floor of the Civic Car Park. Agenda item 1, attendance and apologies. Chris Slade, have we had any apologies, please?
Yes, Chair, we've had apologies from Councillors Glyn Carron, Giles Davis and Nick Jones.
Okay, thank you. Members, any other apologies you know of? No. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Justine Cass, do you have any advice for members, please?
Thank you, Chair. Members have looked through the agenda. I can't see how you have any declarations. However, as you know, if you know of any declarations, then please declare now.
I declared something in the book. My brother's got a minibus business within Torvine. So,
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, members. If anything else springs to mind, can you make sure any interests are also written into the normal form, please? Agenda item 3, which is on page 3, minutes of the previous licensing committee, 26 July 2018, which is on page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, and page 8. Can someone move that the minutes are correct?
I move.
Okay. Thank you, members. Excellent. Agenda item 4, page 9, quarterly report update. Alison Hughes, could you present the report for us, please?
Thank you, Councillor. I'll just run through the quarterly licensing report fairly quickly. It is reasonably routine. I think we've been doing this for a while now, haven't we? Just to move on, what I'll do is go straight through to the operational matters, starting with alcohol and entertainment. And just to report that we had 16 complaints from the public in relation to licensed premises. 6 of those were linked to noise nuisance, and I think that was really linked to the fact that we had a very good summer this year, and there were more people having outdoor events in pubs and more people around those pubs with their windows open to enjoy the warm weather. What's happened with those is that they were dealt jointly by the licensing officer and environmental health officer, and involved early intervention with the premises licence holders where appropriate. So we would have gone out and spoken to those licence holders, established what happened and given advice as appropriate. We've also received complaints in relation to underage drinking, disorder and illegal betting. In relation to the allegations of underage drinking, visits were made to the premises, CCTV footage viewed, and no evidence was found to corroborate those allegations. Obviously those are part of the work that we do anyway in terms of underage sales and some of the programmes that we put in place, one of which we're actually looking at in the near future. If I could just break away from that for a moment and discuss complaints in general, just to reiterate how to make a complaint if you have something reported to you, or that you've seen a problem, or you're dealing with a member of the public. We are looking for complaints to be made wherever possible in writing by the person who's affected by that, because that way we get the story straight off the bat on what they're complaining about and what they're asking us to do. So if somebody's complaining to you, I'd say encourage them to contact us directly if you can. If not, find out as much as you can about what they're complaining about and put that through to us. And I'd always recommend that you put it through to the general licensing inbox so that we can find somebody to deal with that for you. The danger is, we had that just recently where somebody had suffered a bereavement and we didn't necessarily know what was in that inbox that needs to be picked up. So what I'd say is always put it through to the licensing inbox. We will pick it up, we'll find somebody to deal with it from there and look at the best person to resolve that for you. Okay. Moving on then to some of the other matters relating to licensed premises. We haven't had any new licence applications during the quarter that we're talking about here up to September. A couple of premises haven't paid their annual fee, but they've been closed, so those are just on hold. There were 3 iron track testing operations with the police, where they looked at 9 premises and minimal issues only were found at 4 premises, so advice was given to them. We haven't actually had any joint visits with the Immigration Enforcement Officer because those visits are intelligence-led, so if they think there's a problem in the area, they'll come and visit those problem premises, and they may then sample other premises in the area when they've got time. So they'll say, well, we need to visit there, we'll do another couple when we're in the area, but we haven't had any problems just recently reported to us. We did deal with an appeal against a decision to revoke an alcohol licence, and that was following a representation by the Immigration Service. At the first appeal hearing, the reasons for the appeal were established and the court dictated the timescales that then had to be met by both parties in presenting the evidence. In fact, the court have been very forthright in making sure that those timetables were met, and when they weren't, the appeal was actually, it hasn't actually been heard by the courts, and we have now received our full costs in respect of the work that we did. So, just to move on from there, following the failure of the appeal, they have now put in an application under another name, as they're entitled to do, but because that was after the appeal and therefore the licence was held not to be in existence anymore, they've had to make a new application. So we're looking at that at the moment to make sure that we deal with that application in a way that prevents any future problems. The next item is relating to something that you may have heard about in the press, which is the minimum price for alcohol, which has been introduced now in Wales. It's been approved by the National Assembly for Wales and is expected to come into force in the summer of next year. The bill was introduced as part of the Welsh Government's wider effort to reduce excessive drinking, recognising the impacts this can have on people's health and well-being. We're expecting the Act to introduce a minimum price of about 50p per unit. This would mean that a bottle of cider would have a minimum price of a couple of pounds and a bottle of wine £4 and upwards. So this would particularly impact the availability of cheap alcohol from some supermarkets and off-licences. We're not expecting it to have an impact in pubs simply because they're already charging more than that, because they're charging for the service of the drinks and the premises and everything else, so they're already well above that 50p per unit limit. The Act allows for the service of fixed penalty notices or prosecutions then where offences are found. We're still waiting for confirmation from the Welsh Government on how that's going to be enforced and the responsibility for that and training. And I would say that one of our concerns is that they haven't identified any resources for that. I think they're assuming that the fixed penalty notice will cover the resource issue, but our experience is that serving a fixed penalty notice is very time consuming in itself and may not cover even the cost of the fixed penalty notice system, never mind the wider enforcement picture. The good news is that we'll be doing a lot of the enforcement as part of our wider inspection programme, so we'd expect that side of things to be fairly straightforward. The issue will come if we get lots of complaints and how do we deal with that. But we'll report back to future committees on what we learn is coming through from the Welsh Government on what they're intending on that one. So are there any questions on the alcohol licensed premises, or any concerns that you wish to raise at the moment?
Councillor Parish?
I haven't got a question. I was going to ask you if the minimum charge was enforceable, but obviously the Assembly haven't come up with all that you need to know about that as it stands now, because I think it's going to be quite difficult to enforce.
What they've done is they've actually introduced an equation, and it's basically it's going to be fairly straightforward. You look at the size of the bottle, you look at what they're saying is the percentage of alcohol in there, and you can just work out from there what units is in there. Helpfully, a lot of bottles actually say the units on the side anyway, so that'll be fairly straightforward. And I think that in reality, certainly the branded alcohol, any of the wines and any of the branded ciders and beers are going to be above this limit anyway. It'll be the unbranded products that will be more difficult, and those prices will go up. Now, I know that my mother's complaining because it means her ingredients for some of her food, where she uses cider, is going to go shooting up in price because she's not a teenager getting drunk on it out on the streets, but she's still going to be impacted. So, but what I've actually said to her is perhaps she ought to be using better ingredients in her cooking anyway. So I'll get around that. But this is the intended impact is on those with an alcohol problem, and particularly youngsters. We have an issue where people can be drunk in pubs and particularly in nightclubs, but they're getting drunk before they go there, and they're getting drunk on the cheap alcohol, and this is what's now been brought in to stop that. And it'll be the very cheapest alcohol in your off licences that'll be impacted by this. So we're not expecting too big a problem. So moving then on to the Hackney and private hire licensing, we've had 7 taxi-related complaints relating to matters such as an unlicensed vehicle. We've had a couple of smoking in vehicles and the late arrival of taxis, etc. One complaint related to the refusal of a driver to accept a wheelchair user as a passenger, and that comes into reports I've done for you previously on equalities and the fact that there is now very clear guidance on how we should be dealing with these. And what we've actually done is we have acted on that one and given advice to make sure that there are no further instances by that driver. So we've gone back and made sure that the problem that existed has been resolved. We did bring one report on a taxi driver application before the panel, and the application was refused. And we've also brought a very big report in front of a panel in respect of a private hire operator, and that's the one that's been previously mentioned as an ongoing matter to this committee. On that particular one, a decision has been deferred in order to allow an improvement action plan to be put in place. And I can report that there's an inspection of the premises is due very shortly. We're working with that private hire operator, and we'll be reporting back on the outcome of the reconvened panel to the next committee. A request was made that the Hackney carriage fares be reviewed. I'm not going to go into that in much detail as the next report covers that. And then finally, I think, is I'm not going to go all the way through this with you, but just to let you know that a task and finish group on taxi and private hire vehicle licensing has published their report. It's UK-wide, and it's made a number of recommendations, including an urgent review of the taxi and private hire vehicle legislation. That brings me on to reporting on what's going on in Wales. I've previously notified you that they're looking to update the legislation here in Wales. Unfortunately, that's currently on hold. The officer who was taking that through is very, very keen on doing so, has moved over to another post. My understanding is they have just appointed someone else to take over that work, but obviously it's going to take them a little while to get their feet onto the table. So it may be that it'll all come part of this wider UK review, but we're keeping an eye on that. And certainly if you have, if you're accessing this electronically, I've given you the link there that you can just link on and read what they've got to say on that. But they make a number of good points that really would help if they were brought in to modernise the legislation, which of course goes back to the last century. It's, I think we recognise that it really isn't fit for purpose as it stands. It's very difficult for us to actually, enforce, and sometimes it's difficult for the people in the trade to actually kind of work sensibly and in accordance with modern standards. So are there any queries or questions on the taxi matters at the moment?
Councillor Parish.
The recommendations, some of them I can't really get my head around. Government should legislate that all taxi and PHV journeys should start and or end within the area for which the driver, vehicle and operator are licensed. But when they operate in a borough as small as Torfaen, that's going to be very difficult, I think. Do you know what I mean? I just can't see that working. Blaenau Gwent is another very small borough. Surely people want to go to Newport and, Usk and, places like that from Torfaen. How would that work out?
At the moment, the arrangement is that the private hire operator, the vehicle and the driver should all be licensed by the same authority, and for the private hire operation in particular, normally they would expect to be taking bookings that start or finish in the area. So you could take a booking starting in Torfaen and going all the way off to the, to Heathrow Airport, and that isn't a problem as long as they start and or finish. You can pick up from Heathrow and bring them back. That isn't a problem. I think that we've got to talk around how we deal with this, because we're actually getting people ringing us and saying, I want to, how can I license with you? I want to work for Uber in Cardiff. And what we have now, and it's going to be very difficult to deal with, is we're making Uber and other companies. So we had somebody phone last week and say, I want to set up an app. And they're talking to 3 authorities in which they want that app to work. So it's quite difficult. So that at the moment they're having to license with each and every authority, and we all have different licensing conditions. It makes it very difficult for a national company. But for a member of the public, they just want to be able to go onto an app and book a taxi that's close to them to take them wherever they want to go. So I think that'll be interesting to see how that works. And what they're proposing at the moment is to say, fine, but you actually park the vehicle to pick up, even on an app. If it's parked in the high street, any town, then it's licensed with any town council, but from there it can go anywhere it likes. And that's what they're suggesting.
Councillor Parish, yeah.
If you don't mind, Chairman. The very last one, that says the restriction, it's a case for restricting the number of hours a taxi and PHV drivers operate. I'm surprised we haven't already got that, because if there isn't a restriction, they could be working goodness knows how many hours and they wouldn't be safe.
I think I'm surprised as well, but it's something we didn't necessarily think about back in the day. And the other difficulty you've got to look at is a lot of drivers are part-time. So we've got one driver that actually works in Blaenau Gwent, and he lives in Bristol, and he said because he works full time, he's got to buy a car to get to work. He can't afford the car, and therefore he works part time as a taxi driver to buy the car. Okay, and it isn't worth being licensed in Bristol, so he comes over here because it's quicker and easier to operate here. So what you're saying is that actually, even if I limited the number of hours he operated as a taxi, it wouldn't necessarily be making sure that he was actually wide awake when he was driving. So that's going to get to be quite a difficult subject. But we do have a 24-hour taxi trade, and how you actually make sure that the drivers aren't being asked to work there is going to be a big issue, particularly with the apps that are coming in, where a driver could be sitting on his mobile phone at home or even in bed and pick up a call and think, oh, I better take that, that's good money, and climbs back out of bed and goes and picks up the customer. We've got this, because that's how they're working, they could be working very long hours. And the other difficulty we would then have is when are they on standby, when they're sitting waiting for work, and when are they actually working? They could say, well, I've only done 4 hours driving, but they've been awake for 12 hours waiting for those calls to come in. So it is quite difficult, and I think that's going to be a very thorny subject to tackle. And it's one that we haven't in ours at the moment, because when we wrote our original policy, even back a couple of years ago, Uber and all of the apps now being developed weren't really in existence. We weren't having to answer these questions. I think the other thing to bear in mind here in Torvine is we have a very different trade to some other areas. A lot of ours are private hire operators. And what you've got here is the cars are working 24/7, but they've got a rota of drivers that come in and out. And it is actually for the private hire operators to ensure that drivers are fit and able to drive. There is still health and safety legislation that makes that a requirement. So they aren't free to do whatever they like. But it will be dealt with under health and safety, not under the licensing conditions.
So there's a couple of councillors have got some questions for you. Councillor Jones, please.
In the interest of passengers, it states here that all licensed vehicles should be fitted with CCTV cameras, both visually and audio. Is it something that we are considering implementing now, or is it something that's going to be ongoing, for all new applicants?
This is actually really interesting, and it was discussed yesterday at the Institute of Licensing. Because under the General Data Protection Regulations, if we require CCTV monitoring to be provided, there is a view that we become the data controllers for the information that's collected that way. And I can see a look on some members' face of, oh, how would that work? Because the driver and the private hire operator have got access to that, but we're responsible for it. So they can actually be putting stuff on there and saying, well, this person got out without driving, or look what they were doing, and it could be highly embarrassing, particularly if it's somebody who was not their spouse, and you've got all of this going on, but we're the data protection, we're the data owners. So I think that they're actually going back and saying that it would be just as well for us not to require that. There are some real issues. What I'm hoping is that national legislation will come in that actually says that under GDPR they would have to register as the data controllers. And there is a thought that perhaps we can actually say, you must have the CCTV, you must be the data controller and register, but that then becomes quite onerous. So I think that there is still a lot of discussion going on around that.
Okay. Councillor Williams, give you a microphone.
One of the things that's stuck with my mind for a long, long time is the fact that in Blenheim in particular, there's one operator up there that has all his taxi licences done through Monmouthshire, and yet he did auto-bin work. Is that permissible? Why are they allowed to go to another authority to get their vehicles licensed? Right? With no intention really there is only to work in Torvine.
Okay, there's a number of issues there. I think the first thing is that most of us have an intended use policy, so that somebody who is licensed with this authority should be operating in this authority, at least mostly. Okay. But people are still entitled to operate in other areas if the business is there. I would say that for somebody in Abergavenny, they're actually closer to Blaenavon than Cwmbran.
Yeah.
So there is this question of, if they're mostly operating in Abergavenny but are answering any calls from Blaenavon customers, then it would be very difficult to control that. As things stand, it's actually almost impossible for us to control that. But if you felt that that company were not complying with an intended use policy in place in Monmouthshire, then they would be able to investigate.
I think a lot of people, because they use from Neville Hall hospitals, they get taxis home.
Yes, but that's fair enough. But what I'm concerned with is the fact that this one particular company, right, and possibly better off, was taking the task with the traffic commissioners and had his licence revoked. To save part of the embarrassment coming back to Torvain, he went up to Abergavenny and licensed all his vehicles, right? Man up there can bear what I'm saying, and he is running towing contracts. And so I can't understand how, possibly I got the wrong end of the stick. I do feel that in the circumstances, if he took his vehicles to Monmouthshire, and he should be there working for Monmouthshire, the biggest part of his work is in towing.
Okay, if I can just say contracts are a different matter altogether. When a contract is we're obliged to design a contract that delivers the work that we do and then put that out for people to make bids for that work. Yeah. And if somebody is the best bid, then we have to give that work. And I don't think that we would be able to say only Torvine businesses can apply. And in fact, I think the entire procurement process is going in the other direction, saying we can't say that only Torvine businesses can comply.
Councillor Williams could probably take that up with you after the committee, if that's okay. There's another question from Councillor Evans.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to the last page, page 12, the last one with the evidence of restricted number of hours. Are we going to be looking at either a paper book exercise for them to fill in, or are we going to go along the route from HGV and PSV with tacos?
I think that if this is a national legislation, that would be dealt with by them in discussion with local authorities and the trade, and that isn't something that we would control. If it's something that we look at locally, I suspect we'd have to look at a paper record, because I don't think that we could ask just our trade to be providing anything more than that. But don't forget, for the private hire operators, they already have a record of who's driving, because they're obliged to keep records of who's driving which vehicles. So if we have a complaint, we can say who was driving PH 101 at midnight on Friday. So we already have some record anyway.
Can I just ask a question of you, Alison, in relation to this task and finish group? I'm assuming it's attached to central government or the Institute of Licensing. Is that right?
This was reporting. This is reporting to the UK government, and it'll be them that consider this report. Although, having said that, I think for reasons that we can all guess, this is probably not going to be a priority for them in the short term. But it may be that if Wales don't move on with their proposals, that it could be overtaken by anything that's happening on a UK basis, simply because although this is delegated, this is now for the Welsh Government to decide, it doesn't make sense for two different licensing regimes to be established.
So I'm assuming that local authorities would be consulted about these recommendations in any case, and would have an opportunity to feed in, and like with all recommendations, some will proceed and some won't.
Indeed, I think that we would always expect to be consulted on and to make our views known. I have to say that in Wales they've been extremely good at coming to meetings where licensing officers will be and discussing it with those licensing officers. So certainly in Wales the consultation and discussion, even informal discussion process and exchange of views and ideas and thoughts have been actually very, very good and proactive.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Alison. Just a quick one for myself. You did mention Uber earlier on, and I was just wondering, was there much of an appetite for Uber? Have they contacted you much, and would they also fall into the same category as this?
Uber fall onto exactly the same scheme as everybody else. If Uber wished to operate in the Torrevine area, they would need to apply for a private hire operator's licence, and then all vehicles and drivers working for them would have to be licensed here as well. I would say at the moment most of what they're doing is focused on cities and large towns, and they operate across the UK on that basis. But what's happening now is that some local companies are developing their own app. So I think there's a lot of companies, the local taxi companies in Cardiff have already done that. But what's happening is that actually has a number of different private hire operators collaborating. And what we're having an approach now is somebody who wants to design one to work in that area, but he'd then be licensed in each area so that he could do that. But the rules are exactly the same.
Okay, if there's no other questions, members, then we'll move on to the recommendations. Pardon? Recommendations on the... sorry, I do apologise. Yeah.
I think that actually we can move through the rest of the report fairly quickly, but perhaps not as quickly as that. Just to let you know, on the gambling and gaming, we did actually have information on unlicensed gambling premises allegation. Actually, that allegation went into the Gambling Commission, who also take complaints. They came back to us, joint visit done, so we've given advice on that, we're keeping an eye on it. I don't think there's anything much to look at in terms of smoking. For street trading, just to confirm, there was a panel hearing for a new ice cream pitch and round, and the decision was to issue that street trading consent. There's nothing much on any of the others. Animal establishment licensing, just to let you know that we've got lots of new applications coming in, which is quite nice. I'm spending the money, thank you. And just to also let you know that the legislation in England is now in force, and that completely changes the inspection and licensing regime. We're getting a lot of calls from people to say, how does the new legislation affect us? The answer is it doesn't, because you live in Wales. But what we do have is that the model licensing conditions that we've adopted won't now be updated. The mechanisms for doing that seem to have disappeared. We can't depend on it. So what I'm going to be doing is a consultation, and then I'll come back to you yourselves in the spring to look at whether we should just adopt the English model licensing conditions that have been through a quite extensive development process and are the most modern and up-to-date that we have at the moment. There won't be many changes for local businesses, but it'll just make things simpler. Moving on, service requests have had, we're still getting quite a few of those. Overall workloads, I think because of the complaints and new licence applications and the database, we were a bit down on the inspection levels, but we'll be picking that up. Moving on to the management matters, I think that the only thing, a couple of things that will matter to you are the policies. Just to report that the sex establishment and charity collection policies should be with you in the first draft in the spring, and the gambling policy is going to be reported to you later. I would just say that in terms of the taxi policy, the decision at an earlier meeting was not to review it at this time because of the new legislation that was proposed. Because we've got it today on that now, we're going to review the taxi policy, see if any changes are needed. I'm going to report back to you in the spring to see whether we need to actually move forward on a local level. So I think that that's about it in terms of the important matters to report to you.
I feel like I sped you up then. I do apologise. Members, are there any questions now? Councillor Jenkins?
One thing I missed on there was the scrap he went past and my head wasn't with it. As you know now, they've stolen a lot of lead from the museum. So what is being done to check on local scrap yards to find out where all this stuff is going? I know there's a lot of checks done in the scrap yards with CCTV and things like that, and you've got a sign and, you know, but obviously that stuff is going somewhere, isn't it?
We licence all the collectors. We call them in on a regular basis to look at their paperwork. When we're out and about, we stop any that we see, but unfortunately we need the police to actually stop vehicles, and they're not, in a position to assist her at the moment, so we're doing what we can where we can.
What's police?
Was that the...
What police? I've seen a policeman for a long time.
Well, when we're out with the police, if they see a scrap collector, we'll stop them. Or if we know there's a problem, we'll go looking. But what we used to do in the past was have a day set up where we'd go and look for the scrap collectors and stop them all. So that hasn't happened in a while. But we're calling them in, we're looking at their paperwork, and then what we're doing is we inspect the scrap yards, we look at all of their paperwork, we're making sure that they don't pay cash, so that we can check through all of the payments that have been made, so that those checks are being made at the moment. We're a little bit behind on those, but I know they've just started in Blaenau Gwent, and one of our officers was over there, getting them started, and they'll come back here and get started here.
Yeah, with regards to that, I think we've all seen it, that you see these lorries going around and they just overloaded with scrap. They're hanging off the back, they're hanging off the sides. So, I think you should insist that the police come and give you a hand. Well, if you can find any.
Dangerous vehicles that are overloaded are actually a police matter. Our job is to make sure that it's legitimate scrap from a known source, and that would be where we would be looking at. But as I said, if there is a problem with a particular vehicle, if you let us know what that is, we can notify it to the police and say, when you're out and about, keep an eye out for this one, please.
Councillor Evans?
I mean, a good question, really, by putting there. Previously, the council, on a lot of the properties in the schools and everything, use smart water. Was there any use on any of that building for Pontypool Museum?
I don't know.
No. If you want to see Alison Lee, yeah, just so we can stick to the agenda, okay. Any other questions, members, before I think I'm safe to go on to the recommendations now? Yeah, okay. So the recommendations are on page 16, 11.1. The committee note the activity report for this quarter and the committee note and comment on the contents of the report. Can someone move that we're happy? Yeah. Can I have a show of hands, please? Okay. Thank you, members. Recommendations have been agreed. Agenda item 5. Page 23, taxi fares review. Alison, can you present the report, please? Okay, thanks, Alison. Just before I open up the questions to members, I'd like to ask a question myself. The taxi trade obviously haven't, like you said, done a fare increase for 10 years. Is this now going to become more regular for them to look at their fares?
That's a matter for them to decide. They can ask as often as they wish, and we'd certainly not be in a position to say no to an annual review, but there are a couple of things to bear in mind. Firstly, when we're setting the taxi fees that we charge them for the work that we do, and it'll include this work. So they're going to be paid for our time in doing it, in consulting, which we have to consult, in advertising it, etc. And then, of course, they've got to pay to have their meters updated. So there's a balance, and I'm not expecting this to be an annual thing by any stretch of the imagination, but I do expect it perhaps to be, we offer to say, do you want it to be looked at? And, we talk with the operators out there who have hackneys as well as private hires and say, well, is this something you want? But, it's for them to come back to us. It's a bit different now in Blaen and Gwent, where they've actually got together to form a taxi association that we're meeting on a regular basis. But it might be that if they're saying, no, look, things have to change, we'd actually come back to our trade and say, well, look, we've been told it has to change. What are your thoughts on it?
Okay, Councillor Parish.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, 10 years is a long time to not, review the charges. But I am a bit concerned about vulnerable people. Torfaen, we don't have high wages in Torfaen. We've got a lot of vulnerable people, as we all know, around the table. Are we sure that this isn't going to impact on them? I know the taxis don't have to charge the top price, and they'll probably bear that in mind. But it is a big jump. But I think we'll just have to see how it pans out, really, and see if the taxi firms are, considerable, or consider these vulnerable people and the wages or the money they have to live on. It would be, as the chairman said, better if it is looked at more often. 10 years is a long time, but I do have concerns about those who are vulnerable, and taxis are the only way they've got of moving around.
I think for the disabled in particular and wheelchair users, the reality is that they're having to book those vehicles ahead many, many weeks in some cases. And what will actually happen is that they will have a routine booking at an agreed fare that is long-standing. And so they're not going to be really affected by this to any great extent. I think that actually what affects them more is the availability of those vehicles, and if they're in short supply, they can be charged more than if there's lots and lots of them around. And that's going to be a bigger factor for them. I think that actually for those who pre-book and ring round and say how much will it cost me to get to, they're not going to be impacted because that'll still be competitive, especially during the day. The impact will be on those that have done their shopping. They haven't actually arranged any way of getting home. They suddenly decide they're not going to walk or get on the bus, and they go to the taxi rank. And when they get in the taxi, the meter will go on, and they will then be paying slightly more for that journey. But for anybody who's booked to go shopping and say, can you pick me up at 10:30 when I've finished, and the ones you see pulling up pre-arranged and waiting for people, that'll all be by negotiation, and the hackney carriages can negotiate just as easily as the private hires. We're also finding that if there's a lot of people on the rank, what people are doing is going down and saying, I need to get to such and such a street, what do you charge me? Then go to the next one, what do you charge me? The next one, what do you charge me? And they're getting the cheapest one. So there's still a lot of competition there. So even the ones that are walking onto the rank straight off, they can, sometimes they can just shop around.
Okay, thanks, Alison. Thanks for asking that question as well, Councillor Parish. Councillor Evans?
Hi, Alison. What kind of percentage of Hackney carriages do we have in Torfaen as opposed to private hire vehicles? How many sort of vehicles will this affect?
It's less than half of our vehicles, it's about a third. Yeah. So, as I said, I think a lot of journeys are actually made pre-booked in the private hire, because the other thing to bear in mind is it's not just the number of vehicles that are out there, but the length of time they work. And a lot of what we have licensed as private hire, as Hackney carriages, actually take pre-bookings through the private hire operators in the same way as a private hire vehicle would. So a lot of the journeys made by the Hackney carriages wouldn't be affected by this at all. And what I would expect is that on Friday night, you've probably not got very many sitting on the rank at all, because the private hires and the Hackneys are all pre-booked for a pre-agreed price, and they're picking people up and dropping them off, not from the rank.
Thanks, Alison. The other Councillor Evans.
Yeah, mine is a different question altogether. On the Hackney carriage fares, I'm looking at anyone sold in a vehicle may be charged up to a maximum of £150. How are we going to govern that? Because sometimes people with disabilities do have accidents. And how are they going to base that charge? Are they going to charge them anything between that, or will they be charging them mostly the maximum?
Our experience is that they charge what it actually costs them to have it cleaned. But if somebody came to us and said that as a result they had to have the vehicle thoroughly cleaned and they lost 3 other high-paying jobs, and they had to make alternative arrangements, or there's even worse, there's people were left standing because there wasn't a vehicle, then it's not unreasonable for that maximum charge to be made. And I think that people need to be aware that if they get in the back of a taxi, drop dead drunk and they're feeling queasy, that there is an impact on that taxi and on other customers.
Yeah.
But I'm not aware, certainly at the time that I've been here, I'm not aware that we've had a complaint that somebody's been charged that amount. I think actually for the trade they'll probably tell you it's the opposite. They stop and they might actually ask that person to get out of the vehicle, but they then that's the end of it, and they're very often not getting any money at all towards cleaning the vehicle and the losses that they've had as a result.
Great, thanks, Alison. Justine, you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. Alison, after we've been out to consultation, I'm assuming then there'll be a report back to committee informing them of that, whether there were any objections, for example, if there weren't, and then it would go through?
The legislation as it stands requires us to bring it back to yourselves if there are objections. If you whatever rate you approve will now be advertised, and if there are no objections it'll come into force, and we're stating on the 1st of November. And because we are now trying to get it in for them before Christmas, that's a big early time for them. So that's it. If there are objections, then we'd bring it back to yourselves, and obviously would be reporting then to the next committee how that went ahead, whether it's come in. So we'd report to the next committee if there aren't any objections.
Okay, you're okay with that? Yeah. Councillor Evans?
If this is obviously goes into practice on the 1st of November, how are we going to publicise this? How are we going to let people know that their Hackney carriage fares will be increased?
That would be through the advert goes out, but what actually happens is that most people just hop in and say, how much is it? The thing goes on, it tells them what it is. But each and every taxi, Hackney carriage, has to have the fare shown so that people can see it.
Yeah.
Okay, so what will happen is that tariff has to be on display, and we check when we do vehicle checks to make sure that that is the case.
Okay, members, we...
I'd like to make an observation.
Okay, Councillor Jenkins.
I just can't believe it's been 10 years. Fares have, everything have gone up. Fuel, insurance, wages. Is there any way we can sort of fetch this 10 years down next time? It must be a struggle out there for taxi firms.
I think that we've been aware of those changes, and in fact, insurance has gone up. Vehicle costs have actually remained quite competitive. Petrol prices have actually come down. I know that's difficult to believe when you look at the pumps today, but it's actually been more expensive. I actually did this to look out, what would have been the changes, and I think, good grief, they've been up to as high as 140 a litre. Actually, for a lot of the trade, particularly those who employ people, it's been the minimum wage and the living wage that have actually made a very big recent impact. In terms of the costs, as I said, we've been aware of these. We've been discussing them with the trade. We would have been sympathetic to the trade if one of them came to us and said, please can you ask the trade if they want this, but in fact they haven't done so. In Blaenau Gwent, just to put you in the picture, is even more proactive in that they actually went out to the trade as recently as last year and wrote to everybody and said, do you want this? And we got, I think, 10 replies, and they were 50-50 on, yes we do, things have gone up, and no we don't, because we can't compete as things stand, because it's so competitive out there. We're already not charging what we're allowed to charge. So, having said that, they've now come back and said, well actually no, they do want a fair increase. I think mainly because we said that our fees are going up, and said, well, they need to cover that. So that is the other inflationary pressure for them. But as I said, when we've asked the trade for the last 10 years, they've said no. So it isn't that we've been unsympathetic for the last 10 years, it's that we haven't been asked to do this for the last 10 years.
Can you reply to that, Chair?
Yes.
I find that statement astonishing, really astonishing, that nobody wants an increase. Like, the running costs must be tremendous for taxi firms out there. And whether it's at Blaenau Gwent, Torfaen, or everywhere, I just find it amazing that, like you said, fuel have come down. Yes, it has come down recently. But you go back the last 10 years, the price they were paying 10 years ago, Fred. Insurance, the price of insurance. I know that for a fact, with my business, how things have gone up. And the fuel, insurance, the only thing that I'm concerned about is that if they are running on the margin, that's where things don't get done, maintenance. And I know you do your checks and everything else, but I think you should be more robust in your checks, because this is opening the door without increases to, what can I say, overlooking things.
I think because there is a cost to the trade of implementing a fare increase, we would only do it if the trade wanted it. And the trade haven't told us up to now that they've wanted it. So I understand what you're saying, that it seems strange that it's been 10 years, but this is the first time in that period that the trade have come to us and said, yes, we want it. We might have had a few queries in the past, but the rest of the trade won't have supported that, and that may have happened, not in my time that I recollect, but this is the first time in that period where somebody said, please can you look at it, and everyone else has said, yeah, we think that's a good idea.
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor.
In view that all councillors are concerned with the length of time it's been, is it something that we, as a committee, should not consider reviewing it in, say, 5 years' time?
I think that we would always be talking to the trade. And it's for them to come back and say they're willing to pay the costs of having that review done, because there are costs that they would have to pay as part of the licence fee, and for the advertising, and then for having their meters changed. So as far as we're concerned, it's for them to come to us. But we are always asking that question: do you want us to look? Do you want us to look? And we can confirm to you that that is taking place. Without that support from the trade, I would say that I wouldn't want to be imposing a fair increase on them, that they don't, with those costs, that they don't feel that they can recoup those costs through the fares that they actually charge.
satisfied that they are so competitive, because probably even using public transport is much more expensive than hiring a taxi on occasions. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I think it's. I was at that meeting, and it's very clear to me that the trade know. Well, they know when they put the money up or not. So it's not as if the council are stopping them from doing it. It's as and when they wish to do it. So that's it. So if that's all, members, on the questions, I think we should move straight to the recommendations. The recommendations are on page 26 and 27. 12.1. We've got two there. Number one, the taxi fare tariff can be advertised as proposed with a planned implementation date of the 1st of November 2018, or the committee recommends an alternative specified fare tariff be advertised and implemented in accordance with the statutory process. So we need to go for one or the other.
I recommend the first one.
Yeah, so we're recommending.
Do you want to go around the table,
Yeah.
Chair?
Okay.
It may just be easier to record.
Okay.
that.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll go around the table and just to be accurate. So, Councillor Jane.
Yeah, first recommendation. For the first recommendation.
First recommendation.
First.
Okay, and I agree. We'll go for the first. So, can someone please move on recommendation 1? Yeah. Seconded, yeah. Show of hands, please. Thank you, members. Recommendation 1 has been agreed. Move on to agenda item 6, which is on page 35, gambling statement of licensing policy. Alison, can you present the report for us, please?
Super, thank you. This looks at the gambling statement of licensing policy, which you have considered earlier in the year. And what I've done is I've outlined some of the background, which I've previously brought to your attention anyway, so I'm not going to go through all of that in terms of the legislation. I think it would perhaps be useful just to look at the types of gambling licence a business may need, and just to reiterate that there are 4 types. The operating licence, which is the company. The personal management licences are required by people in that company who carry out key functions. A personal functional licence will be required at the individual level, and that will be for area managers, and also for some supervisory people actually at the premises, and that would include our bingo premises, and then the premises licence. So there are 4 licences, and this report relates to one of those, which is the premises licence, and the rest are dealt with by the Gambling Commission. They provide a lot of information for existing and prospective gambling businesses at each of the sectors, and they also employ regional compliance managers who, as part of their general enforcement role, work and liaise with us in respect of joint inspections of our premises. I think it's interesting just to look at the Gambling Commission figures from 2015, which actually shows that 60% of adults gamble. Most of us do it on the lottery or on local lotteries, but just under half of us participate in other types of gambling, particularly what my grandma always used to call the GGs, either offline in the betting shop or online. It used to be traditional that I think quite a few of us put something on, particularly for the Grand National and some of the other big races. So gambling is actually a very, very popular activity, and possibly with some of you more than others.
Don't look at me like that. I grip my fingers very tight.
There's no names.
But you know, gambling is a race sport.
But yeah, I think quite quite a few, what we're saying is most adults gamble, and for most of us it's a very enjoyable activity. However, we do have to identify the fact that there's gambling harm also occurs, and what this report is about is how we balance that, so that it stays a fun entertainment activity for the majority of adults, but that we're protecting children, and that we're actually looking at how we prevent harm from happening. So what I've done is I've covered some of the issues and guidance that we follow, and particularly the Gambling Commission guidance, which actually states how this statement of policy should be laid out and the information that it contains. There's one thing I have actually identified, which I was a bit surprised about, on item 4.7, is that the first Apple iPhone, which revolutionised the smartphone market, was only 10 years ago. There were mobile phones before then. I remember my first mobile phone, and I just thought I was absolutely the business with this, and it was a box this big that you put the phone on and off. Yes, do you remember those? But I was on call officer. I had a mobile phone. Now I'm betting that each and every one of you has a smartphone in your pocket. And just recently, there's been an explosion of companies that are selling you gambling activities, so you can now gamble wherever and whenever you want. And what we're looking at now, as I said, that's been an absolute explosion of the smartphones just 10 years ago, and with the gambling companies just in the last few years. And now 33% of gambling is thought to be online. And on your mobile phone, etc. Possibly slightly lower in some parts of Wales where we don't have internet speeds and 4G, but it is still looking at about 33%, and that is an increasing amount, I think, particularly if you look at the level of advertising, which you can't now avoid for these companies. And we were speaking to somebody from the Gambling Commission yesterday who was saying that really is something that the Gambling Commission are looking at the moment. I was actually looking up something. I went to look at Gamblers Anonymous, and there were 3 adverts for gambling companies above that entry on Google, and I was there thinking, this is, it is actually quite heavy, the level of advertising that exists. What's actually happened in response is that most of our gambling premises in the area have started to focus on the social aspects of gambling. They're much nicer than they used to be. There isn't sawdust on the floor anymore. Quite a few of them have food and drink on offer. And for places like the bingo halls, actually the social aspect is seen as the main aspect of those, with people reporting that they're going there, particularly in winter, because it's cheaper than actually heating the house for the day, and rather more fun. So the local gambling premises, they continue to be popular, and although we have 33% of our gambling now being taken online, actually the local gambling premises are still popular, and this report does still have a very important role to play in terms of making sure that gambling remains a safe activity for all concerned. So moving on to the issues and findings, the statement of licensing policy, we first adopted one in 2005-06 as required under the 2005 legislation. We've updated it every 3 years since then as required, and the last one that was updated by this committee was approved by council on 22nd of September 2015 and came into force on the date it's required to come into force, which is the 31st of January of the following year. Looking at what the policy actually refers to, in fact we've got 13 premises that are really affected by this policy, plus any new applications that come in, except that we haven't had any new applications in a good long time. There are a lot of other premises out there, you're going to be thinking, but there are a lot of other gambling premises. But there are a lot of the premises that almost tell us what they're doing by right, and we can't stop them doing whatever they're doing because it's seen as very, very low-key, low-risk activities. We just make sure that they're complying with the law, and that really is the only control that we have over those. So moving back to what have we done, as I think we've previously mentioned to you, we've looked at this on an all-Gwent basis via the Gwent Licensing Forum, but then we've looked at our own licensing officers looking at the local area profile to see how that affected it. And once we did all of that work, we came to you in May of this year, and you approved the draft policy for consultation, along with making some suggestions about that consultation process. Okay. In terms of the consultation, we're required to consult with the Chief Officer of Police, and what it says is one or more persons who appear to the authority to represent the interests of people in the gambling businesses in the area, and one or more persons who represent the interests of people who are likely to be affected by what we do. The guidance actually states that it's a matter for local authorities to develop their own consultation process, and they deliberately left it very vague so that we could do whatever we felt was appropriate to our area. There is some guidance on how we should be doing that, though, and in terms of how we consult with the relevant local groups, businesses and responsible authorities. And one of the key bits of that guidance is that we should consult for at least 3 months, which is what we've actually done. So looking at what we did locally, the consultation process for Torvine was designed to ensure that local gambling businesses, local residents using or affected by gambling businesses, and those representing people potentially harmed by gambling were offered the opportunity to comment on the draft gambling policy. What we did was we put details of the consultation on the Torvine website, so it could be seen by local people and beyond. Letters were actually sent to all of the gambling premises, not just the ones that are perhaps directly related and affected by the policy. And we also sent letters to 44 internal and external organisations, and those were trade associations or those that we thought would be dealing with those potentially affected by the harm. Just to confirm that did include, as you asked for, we dealt with social services, we looked at some of the mental health teams, we contacted as many people as possible, and we did actually speak to the Clarkton councils as well, and send the local town councils, send those, we sent those information on the consultation as requested by yourselves. The consultation ran for 3 months, up to the 15th of September. And I do have an amendment to make to the report at this stage. We actually had different officers dealing with this, and I apologise, but in fact there were 7 responses received. And the 7th response that you haven't looked at, seen previously, was from Crosschalk Solicitors, representing the Association of British Bookmakers. And if I just pass, actually, probably pass a couple of those around that way, I'll pass those around that way. In fact, I realised that this had been missed from the report when I was doing the report for Blair and Gwent, and the report for Blair and Gwent was saying that Torvine and Blair and Gwent have looked at this together in order to, were they not, they should have been stapled together?
Yeah.
Right, I think it's stapled every page instead of... Right, okay.
All right, now.
My apologies. Well, if necessary, I think we've got... See if I've got a version anyway. If not, I've got one here. But just to quickly to go through the consultation responses, what we've done is we've attached all of the consultation responses in Appendix 2. So this attaches now to Appendix 2 for you. But I can confirm that we have gone through this along with all of the others. And for instance, on page 82 of your report, when you're looking at the gambling policy, Crosschalk have asked that the draft statement of licensing policy would be assisted by a clear explanation in relation to mandatory and default conditions, and in fact we'd already put that in there. So there were a couple of other things that we have actually put in. We've put in a definition of betting machines and gaming machines to make that clearer as they requested. And they've also looked at the risk assessments and the information that we're asking them to consider. In fact, we didn't change the list of things that we asked them to consider as they've asked. They're saying that a lot of it isn't relevant and there's no evidence. But what we're saying is we need them to look at that just to confirm that that's still the case. We expect that, as they say, that at the moment things may not be relevant or evidence-based, but when they're doing a local risk assessment, what we'd ask is them to look at that and think, oh no, that's still the same, there's been no change there, or to think, well, actually on that there has not been a change, there's been new evidence, therefore we need to bring that into our local risk assessment. So what we've done is we've gone through all of those. We've attached all of the responses for you as Appendix 2. Just have a quick look for you on what page that started. That's starting on page 49. Because some of them were made by individuals representing their organisation, we've just taken out the details of the individuals, leaving the organisation information still there, so that you can see which organisations have responded. Okay. So you can see that we've had from the Gambling Commission, we've had, and they've looked at a number of different legislative matters, Newport Citizens Advice, and in fact they've actually spoken to us about meeting with us more proactively so that we can take issues that they're finding into account when we're enforcing. GamCare are one of the big national organisations that represent those harmed by gambling, and who advise the Gambling Commission and others on how to minimise that harm. We've got a lot of information from them. HM Customs Nexus, we're just changing their date, their details, their contact details. Social Services, they updated us on how we could actually integrate with the, protecting the vulnerable people and some of the stakeholder groups in respect of that. And the Health Board they responded very proactively in respect of preventing public health harm from gambling addiction, etc. And I think that's important to bear in mind, because gambling harm is, as a public health issue, is now being really recognised and commented on quite widely. That isn't really new, insofar as the Gambling Commission actually held a meeting in Wales a couple of years back, in which I reported to this committee, where they actually had a very good meeting and discussion with those who were from the public health sector in particular, and representing those harmed by gambling addiction, etc. They're having very good conversations around how do we actually prevent that harm and what can we do. But that actually, the findings of that meeting were back to even 2 years ago, mobile phones and advertising, and what the Gambling Commission can do about that, and that is still something that they're actively looking at. So what we've done is, from all of that, we looked at the draft gambling policy again that you'd approved, the amendments in red, and I'm sure that most of you have now copied these out in black and white, haven't you? So if I just say that there is a way of doing this, the amendments in red will show slightly paler on what you're looking at, and likewise the green, but they're just correction additions made by ourselves where we notice the typos. But the amendments in blue are underlined. So if you look at the gambling report itself, which starts on page 65, what you'll find is that the bits that are on there that are underlined are the bits that have actually been amended as a result of the consultation process. So even in black and white you can see those quite easily, and you will see that actually there's quite a bit there, and particularly for the Gambling Commission that gave us a lot of information on betting and gaming machines, etc. What they've asked for has been put in wholesale. There've been quite a few changes that have made things clearer. But I think that in terms of some of the concerns from the trade, I think that what we have made very clear right from the get-go, and we've emphasise this where appropriate, is that what we're looking for is the licensing objectives and how we comply with those, and that's all we're asking them to look at is the licensing objectives. They might look at quite widely at how they feed into those, but in the end what matters is the licensing objectives, and that's what we'll be deciding applications on, or if we get any requests to review a licence, that'll be what you're looking at when making any decision. So what I might do is perhaps stop there temporarily and ask you if there is anything you want to say about the consultation process, the consultation responses, or the amendments we've made. Would this be a good time to stop and have a look at that, or would you rather do it at the end of the report? Into the report. Okay, fair enough. So moving on then, from looking at the amendments, just to confirm that the approval of the policy actually rests with Council. One thing to mention is that the closing date for the Council report is tomorrow, lunchtime. And Chris will be shouting at me to make sure that I comply with that. And I'd rather like any changes to be seen by Chris and Justine so that they review any changes that we're making to say, yes, that is what you've asked for. So if you've made any changes, I'd like them to be agreed here and nice and slowly so I can write them down, and I will then go back to the office, make those changes and get them out for people to have a look at and get them submitted tomorrow. So we have a process in place. I was going to report them verbally to Council, but I think we've said, unless there's an awful lot and we really can't cope with it, then I will try and do that in writing. But obviously you yourselves will be at Council, so it might be that you'll be able to put in any further information just for clarification. But certainly your recommendations will go to them for consideration. The next thing to look at is the resolution to whether or not to issue casino licences, because you are Council is entitled to make a decision, to make a resolution not to issue casino licences, and this again is something that we'll be reporting any recommendation that you would wish to make. In passing such a resolution, we can actually take into account any principal matter, not just the licensing objectives. But it must apply to casino premises generally. You can't actually choose geographic areas or types of casino. It's an all or nothing discussion. Torvine have previously adopted such a resolution, and what that means is that if somebody applies for a gambling licence, it would simply be returned to them with the information that a resolution has been passed, and therefore we do not consider any applications. However, there is another way through that I'll come on to, because when we're looking at the resolution and any recommendation you wish to make to Council on this, you might be looking at the negative impacts that a casino may bring, particularly around gambling, harm and addiction, but also the positive impacts in terms of job creation and other economic benefits, but also as an entertainment venue for those that actually enjoy gambling activities and can do so safely. So there's that balance to find. And what I have suggested as perhaps another way through is that we could actually recommend that the constitution of the authority be amended so that all casino applications are determined by the licensing committee. So at the moment, all applications, and we'd have to go back to Justine and see whether we're able to do so. I have to say that if there are any, what we have at the moment is that any applications that come in, if there are representations made, would automatically come to yourselves anyway for determination. But this may be one where we actually look at whether we just say, no, and I've got to say with the casino, I expect there to be representations, so I'd expect them to come to you for determination anyway. But I'm happy to go back and discuss with Justine and look at the constitution as to whether we could say no, that would come automatically to yourselves anyway. I don't know whether Justine wants to comment on that.
Not at this stage. So, members, I don't want to be put on the spot in relation to this. What I would want to do is carefully look at the Constitution and make sure one that we have the power to do it and have a conversation with Alison as to whether it's the right thing to do. And then, we then report to committee council as appropriate. But at this stage, I think I can say nothing more than, it's a discussion that I'll have with the licensing department.
If we are able to go down that route, it would give you the option of being able to really look at applications to make sure that they bring benefits, but any potential harm is answered in that application process. And that may be, something that a positive way to move forward rather than just saying no. But as I said, in the past, council have said no, perfectly within your rights to do so, and I've actually put in the policy. I think that at the moment the policy actually says that, and I've had to go back and draft. I would redraft that, depending on the conversation that you have.
Councillor Adam, do you have a question?
I'm assuming that can't be done by lunchtime tomorrow. No. So, have we had in the last 3 years any casino applications?
We haven't. But that doesn't mean, I think that to be fair, I think if you look at some of the retail and entertainment complexes that are now becoming common, I think quite often gambling and casinos may be seen as part of the entertainment offering. And because we're quite close to the motorway, it's something that, there is. I could envisage a situation in future where somebody would come in at the bottom end of Cwmbran with something that's quite close to the motorway, they're all near the heads of the valley, and say, we want to have an entertainment and retail complex, and that, it may be that a casino would be part of that. And, it would be a shame to lose everything without actually further considering, is that a good idea, let's look at this and see what we actually think, rather than just say, no, we're not even going to consider it. On the other hand, if members feel quite strongly we shouldn't have a casino, then that's fair enough, and we can say that up front, and that's, that is a decision that can be made. Members to be aware that, that was something that we haven't in the past, but we could in the future, and how do you want to deal with it? Would you actually want to look at it on a case-by-case basis, or just say no now? And that's what we're really asking.
Okay. Carry on with the report.
Okay. So to carry on with the report then, I've covered I think the resolution to issue or not to issue casino licences. Looking at the implications, I think there were a couple of implications that we do need to look at. I think legal, financial partners, etc. I think those are very straightforward. The one implication I think we do need to really consider is the well-being, social inclusion and equalities. And I've tried to give quite a bit of information in this report, which I'll just go through now with yourselves. Looking at the known harm of gambling addiction, that can occur. As I said, gambling is a popular pastime for the majority of the adult population. It's significant economic and social in terms of, employment in the area. And going to bingo and the betting shop is a social activity for many. And I think that's important to bear in mind, particularly for groups that may be suffering from loneliness, that we've got the public health harm of loneliness for those people that, we need to counterbalance. So that's fine, but it's not the case for all gamblers that gambling is a good and positive thing. An investigation into the social impacts of problem gambling in Wales, and that was published by the University of South Wales in 2017, that outlined potential gambling harms, including personal struggles, despair, family breakdown, poverty, and for children growing up with the threat of homelessness due to gambling financial losses. It also suggested that the gambling industry appears to actually target the vulnerable, with gambling premises clustered in areas of deprived, in the geographical areas. So they might actually be focused on those communities, either because those are who do the gambling or, for whatever reason. I think it's worth looking at then at some of the things that's already being done to minimise that harm, so we can actually say, well, is that enough, and how do you want to take this forward? And the main thing for the Gambling Commission is self-exclusion, which they promote quite comprehensively as a way to minimise harm for those recognising that they have a problem, and I think those that don't recognise they have a problem is a different matter. It supports those who have decided that they want to stop gambling for at least 6 months, and that they want to be supported in their decision to stop. And once that agreement is made, the gambler would go into their local gambling premises, and they would actually then say, I want this self-exclusion to be put in place. That company would then close any accounts and return any money owed to that individual. They'd remove their name and details from any marketing databases that they hold. They'd take reasonable steps to prevent that person from gambling at that premises. But what they also do is they have to be part of a multi-operator self-exclusion scheme, which requires them to then tell other similar premises in the area that that person has self-excluded. So if a person goes into their local betting shop, that betting shop would then be required to tell all other betting shops in the Torvine area that that person has self-excluded. And those other betting shops would then be required to take action as well to make sure that that person doesn't go in and carry on gambling. We look at those self-exclusion policies and procedures as part of our inspection processes. We go with the Gambling Commission on a lot of those inspections. So get back to how gambling is controlled. The operator's licence would have policies in place that were approved by the Gambling Commission. They'd have people licensed in head office in how to make those work. The area managers more locally would be licensed to make sure they understand how they work, and then we go into the premises, often with the Gambling Commission enforcement office, to say, is it actually working? And we'd have a look at it and say, well, and talk through people, what have you done? Give us some examples, tell us what you're doing, etc. We would also investigate very proactively any complaints received by people gambling, to say, look, I did this and they didn't stop me. I was still allowed to carry on gambling there. And those complaints might be received from the Gambling Commission. They've got a website where people can complain, or by ourselves, and whichever one it is, one would tell the other, we'd be doing that jointly, so that we could go back and look right through the process of how's head office dealing with it, how are the area managers dealing with it, what's happening at a local level. So those self-exclusion policies are seen as the main way of combating harm. The other thing then to look at is the risk assessments, which are mentioned in the gambling policy. They are required to do a risk assessment as well, and that would look at local factors such as, are there any premises right nearby where vulnerable people would be expected to be, and then those premises would be required to say, this is what we're doing about it, to make sure that any harm is minimised as far as possible. I would say that, as I said, the level of gambling harm from online activities is being increasingly recognised, and we were told just yesterday by officers that they know that the advertising is something that's been really proactively looked at. I think that the review and updating of the gambling policy really helps ensure that the social inclusion and equality issues are taken into account at a local level by the premises operating here. It's seen as part of that licensing and enforcement process that actually helps to control that. So it's a case of looking at whether you think that's sufficient and it's robust enough, or whether we need to be doing more as part of our gambling policy to say we need to take that further. So I think that's it for the report that I've got to make at the moment. Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. Any questions, members? Councillor Evans?
I've just got a quick question on the conditions 2.8 on I think it's page 83, player protection controls, and it's in red. The licence holder shall train staff to be able to identify customers who are at risk of gambling. I would have thought that all customers going into a gambling premises are at risk of gambling.
Yes.
And they actually want them that way, I would have thought. So it didn't...
risk of gambling. So the risk of gambling.
Yes, so I think that needs to be made more clear, otherwise we'll have phone calls left, right and centre.
So we're on page 83.
Page 83, it's player protection controls under conditions.
Right.
2.8.
No risk of gambling, yes.
Any other questions, members? Okay, so we'll move on to the recommendations. There are two recommendations that we need to do separately, I think. So if we go for the first, which is on page 42, 11.1. The first one is recommend the adoption of the gambling statement licensing policy, making any such changes they view necessary prior to the adoption of that statement. Are you happy with that? Yeah, move. Yeah, seconded. Yeah. So show of hands on that one then. Okay, that's agreed. Thanks, members. Number 2. This is where we need to open it up for if we need to add anything into it. So, provide any such information and or opinions they wish to be considered by the council when deciding whether the council should make resolutions not to issue casino licences. So have we got anything that we're going to... Councillor Jenkins?
Thank you, Chair. I think this... You stated that you're going to make some inquiries whether we can legitimately do it.
Thank you, Councillor. That is for the future. At this stage, what's being asked of you is to provide opinions to feed into council, so it can go to council, and for council to make a decision about the resolution. It may be in the future that we don't do that and it comes before committee, but that's not the position at the moment, because in order to do that, we have to change the constitution, and that takes time. So, unfortunately, the position is, do you have any opinions in relation to the resolution? Do you have any views on having casinos within the borough? That they will be noted now, and they will then be fed to council, and you'll be part of that. In any case, you'll be in council, and then a decision can then be made.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to forward where we go.
Councillor Jones?
My concern, well, is twofold really, on casino. Casinos, as you say, entertainment places, people go in there with a view to doing, perhaps a betting, but there's so much on offer there. I think they will get sucked into spending money and become and the vulnerable will be really affected. And that just really worries me. It's, the state of the society today. Vulnerable leads to poverty, is ongoing. But on the other aspect, I can see that a casino in an area would bring in employment. I think if we do, we should have really strict conditions on there, and hopefully it'll be a widespread consultation before we come to that decision.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Jones. Councillor Mills?
Yeah, I more or less agree with you. I think that rather than have a blanket no, we should consult each application on its own merits and decide accordingly, rather than have a blanket no. As Alison was indicating, we wouldn't want to lose the prospect of a huge leisure centre or leisure complex purely because they are going to have a casino in there. So we would look on each one on its own merit.
Thanks, Councillor Mills. Councillor Evans?
So I think it would be a fabulous idea if we can change the constitution so that any casino applications were brought before the licensing committee. But as that isn't the case at the moment, if we were to say, OK, we'll open up to casino applications and somebody applied tomorrow, what then would the procedure be for applications? How would that work?
As with any application, there was a 28-day consultation period. Responsible authorities and anyone else affected by that application is entitled to make a representation. So, for instance, any of you could say, fine, if we're getting a licence application for a casino, I'll put in a representation to make sure it comes to the licensing committee. Or indeed, I can say, fine, I can do that because I'm a licensing a responsible authority as well. I think the reality is that we will always get from the health board and others who are concerned, we will always get a representation, but it is always open to you as well to say that you recognise that there's a need, but if we do get in one, that you would make a representation on the licensing objectives to make sure that that was being addressed.
Yes, fine.
Thank you, Chair. So I don't think I've understood this, Alison. So if a casino application came in, at the moment we have a resolution, don't we, until January 2019 in place. So that would have to be refused on the basis that we've got a resolution. Is that right?
Yes, just you're correct on that matter. If one comes in tomorrow, the answer is no. If we decide not to adopt a resolution and one comes in on the 1st of February, then we can actually accept that if you've not adopted that resolution, and then we can actually look at how we deal with that. As I've said, I think that the chances of it getting through the 28-day consultation period without somebody coming back and saying, well, let's have a look at that, I think it would have to be a very, very fabulous application for somebody not to be saying, well, can we just consider that further? And to be fair, if it really is that fabulous an application that takes everything into account that we'd want to take into account, then that's exactly the kind of thing that we'd want to be encouraging. So it's a case of, how do we actually deal with anything in the future? I think it may be something then to say, well, actually, for the future, we would then look to perhaps adopt this into the Constitution to say that even in the future, from that point forward, even if somebody doesn't make a representation, it'll come to yourselves. That just means that one of us doesn't have to find something to make a representation on.
I think constitutionally we have to be very clear as to what we're doing in relation to this, and we can't muddy the waters about what we want to do in the future and what is in place at the moment, unfortunately, because then you legally really start to get yourself in difficulties. I think on the back of this report, and because of what you all have said and indicated, a very clear report is going to have to go before Council, feeding in these reports, and that whilst there is a resolution in place until January 2019, perhaps going forward a resolution isn't what is required or what isn't wanted by members of this council, because they want to consider it on a case-by-case basis. So I do think it would have to be a comprehensive report going before members, and as part of that we'll have to consider how to proceed in the future and what's within the remit of committee if that is allowed within the Constitution.
Thank you. As I've said, I'm updating the report to Council. What I'm happy to do is to emphasise in that report that if a resolution not to licence casinos is adopted, then on the 1st of February, if an application is made, that will be immediately rejected by officers. If you decide not to adopt the resolution, then if an application is received on the 1st of February, what would happen is that would undergo a consultation process, that members of the public, yourselves and responsible authorities would be able to make representations on the grounds of the licensing conditions, and I would just say that it does have to be on those grounds. And then, and if a representation is received, that decision would then, that licence would then be determined by this committee in the normal way.
Councillor Evans, you had a question?
So if a casino application came in, if we decided not to just do the blanket no, we would be told about it. we would be informed that an application had come in and
Yes.
that it was in the 28-day.
You get notification of all of the licensing?
Yes.
Yes, and it'll be on that list.
Right, okay. Can I move that we don't then continue to say no to all casino applications?
I think it's providing information and opinions. The councillors so far have made their views very clear. What we can do is we can record your view in relation to your views. And if we deal with it in that manner, then Alison has the information to feed into the report, so it goes before council. And as you know, with council, you'll then have an opportunity to make further comments or to expand on what you've already said. Is that okay? It will do. That's what Alison is in the process of doing. So the Chair in the moment will formally ask you this, but it is to provide any information and or opinions they would wish to be considered by the Council when deciding whether the Council should make a resolution not to issue casino licences. So it's just information and opinions at the moment. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Brilliant. So that cues me straight up to yeah, we're all right to move, second it, yeah. And we're going to recommend it. Yeah. Raise your hands. That's great. That's recommended.
Do you recommend it case by case?
Yeah. Yes.
No.
Okay, brilliant. So that brings us on to agenda item 7, which is the date of the next meeting. The proposed date is Thursday the 24th of January 2019. This is subject to a slight change due to the report deadlines. I'd like to thank Alison for her reports and her hard work on behalf of myself and the committee. I must say I thoroughly enjoyed today's committee and the report. It's very well delivered and entertaining as well. So thank you very much for that. So I'd like to thank everyone, and I now close the meeting.